It just happened to be the right film at the right time.
It showed an aspect of Australian life that no one had ever thought of.
This is the most influential film of Peter's, in my view.
He said, I've wasted my time. I've been sitting here all this time and with a goddamn mystery and there's no goddamn solution.
There was this little line from actually an Edgar Allan Poe poem. All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream, which I think is quoted at the very beginning of the film. That's what it's like, I think, to have been part of Picnic. It was like an incredible dream.
What we see and what we seem are but a dream within a dream.
I did, buy the book off the shelf. Nobody had told me about it, and there it was. And I took it home and started reading it at the kitchen table. And I think I was still there at 12 midnight.
Picnic was the ark in terms of Australian literature, because everybody who'd read it thought, wow, this is a good piece of writing. It's a wonderful story, and what a movie.
I put it down and I thought, that would make the most fantastic film. And shortly after that, because I was doing morning television at that stage, the producer of the show, of the morning television show, took me to see 3 to Go from Film Australia, and there was Peter Weir's Michael.
A fresh look at the phenomenon of the youth revolution.
I was actually knocked out by it.
All right, let's go! Someone lit the sky one day, blew the clouds far away to nowhere.
There was some really typical Peter, completely over the top ideas. Why don't we have troops invade Circular Quay?
He then made, of course, Homesdale, and I saw that.
I remember once, when we were in Korea, this bunch of MiGs hit us, and they're coming down, bang, bang, bang. And one hits the mess hut, and I hit the deck. And there's noise and smoke, and everything is a mess. Anyhow, I get to my feet, see? And I look around to find Mudge. Can't see anything. And then I spot him. He's on his knees, he's on his feet. He's coming up. He's looking at his stomach, you see? But it's gone. Everything is gone. You know what we did? He's dead, see? We laughed. Jesus, we laughed.
More of a visual joke, I suppose.
And of course, I thought, he's got to do it.
She'd seen an early film of mine, I think it was Homesdale. I can't see what connection she saw in it. I'm delighted she did, to think that I could handle something like this.
Homesdale really had a marvellous sense of mystery, and I just found it intriguing. I thought that's what Picnic at Hanging Rock needs. It needs somebody who will believe this remarkable story in the first place. And that's when I approached him with the book.
Patricia Lovell had brought it round to me. I mean, I knew who she was. She was a television personality, but that was a very curious knock at my door.
I think Peter did have his doubts about me because he used to always look at me in a strange way, but then he knew that I was a TV lady and he thought I was just a TV lady, and that's what it was.
So I took the book, and in that period in the Australian film industry, in the early 70s, the idea of making a film from a book was really very foreign. It sounded the big time, that's what they do overseas.
So it was like, but can you do it? I mean, in England they could do it, in America they could do it, but can we do it here? So there's some big leaps that people had to take of faith.
So as I say, I read it from cover to cover, was gripped by it, and by the fact it was an unsolved mystery. And I was burning with it. I mean, it was just like electricity through my body. And I was very keen to make it.
I think when he read the book, he realised that I might have something going, because he rang me up and said, when can we do it?
And I said, how do you go about this? I mean, do you have to get rights? I mean, that's how early it was in the revived Australian industry.
And I got such a shock. And I said, well, I think, first of all, we've got to go to Melbourne and meet with Joan Lindsay, and I'll try and get the rights.
Joan Lindsay, a unique individual, no longer with us. She was a woman of refinement, of elegance, a woman from a world as vanished as is the world of the characters in Hanging Rock.
She had a quality which I think is probably almost died out, died with her generation, which made, you know, a real art of small talk, you know, the art of conversation. Felt just talking about ordinary little things was absolutely delightful, and there was something about her, the quality of her focus on you and just the delicacy of the interchange that was really lovely.
Joan Lindsay was a one-off woman. She was incredible.
I just remember her as being a very sweet, nice, older woman, but very strong. You know, there was a sort of an iron will about her, which was very attractive to be around.
She was married to Sir Darrell Lindsay, and I met her at her wonderful farm out of Melbourne. We went there, Pat Lovell and I, with her publisher, and she was going to approve me or not. So it was strangely an audition, and a director is not used to being auditioned.
She and Peter immediately were soulmates. I could tell the minute we went in there.
I'd been prepped by the publisher who said, don't ask Lady Lindsay whether the story is true or not. Now, the book is introduced by a paragraph that says something like, whether this story is true or not, the characters involved are long since dead, so it hardly seems to matter. So it was obscure and tantalising.
She strongly hints that it's true. You get a feeling. She never says it is, but the way it's written, it has a very strong documentary feel to it.
So I thought, whether I get the job or not, I must ask this question, otherwise it's a bad start, and I have to know. She has to tell me all the secrets.
Peter did ask Joan Lindsay whether it was a true story or not, and she hedged.
And she said, young man, I hope that you do not ask me the question again.
And then sort of mulled over it a bit and said, it's based on fact.
And I said, well, I'll move to another difficult question, and you may tell me that you're not going to answer this. But I said, I mean, do you think it's wide open what happened to these girls? I mean, in your mind, do you think they fell down a hole? Do you think, for example, they were abducted by aliens? And she said, any of the above.
There was something about her that was metaphysical or of another world, and you always felt as though you were talking with somebody who had the most tremendous inspiration from somewhere and didn't quite know from where.
I think I did say at one time that I thought Lady Lindsay had been somewhat, possessed when she wrote this, just from what she told me, that she sat down and it poured out.
I just saw it all passing before my eyes, usually lying in bed at night. When I woke up in the morning, I knew exactly what the next bit was going to be. I never had any trouble about what was going to happen. I just knew.
I was fascinated to hear that Joan Lindsay had dreamt the book over a period of, I think it was something incredible, like 4 weeks. And it was so intense an experience that she got up the next morning and written down what she dreamt.
And in the morning, I would go straight up to the little room upstairs, sit on the floor, papers all around me like that, and just write like a demon, because I knew just exactly what was going to happen from the night before. It was almost as if it was before me in a kind of, almost like a film.
So the whole book came out of this dreaming.
She might have fantasised things, but I can imagine, because when you compose music and you're hearing it in your head and you write it down, you work in another state.
She badly wanted David Williamson to write the screenplay. And of course, David was thrilled and said yes. And I thought he'd read the book. I don't know whether he had or not. But anyway, shortly after that, he was just absolutely swamped with work. And it was he who said, look, I've met this writer called Cliff Green. I'd like you to meet him.
And Pat sent me a copy of the book, so I read the book, and I read it. I literally read it. I didn't put it down. And I could see the movie as I read the book. And the secret in the adaptation, I suppose, was to work out what to leave out.
He's kind of professorial, whereas Peter in those days was sort of, how would you describe him? Sort of young Turk a bit. So Cliff's, I guess, several years older than Peter. So his role was, in a sense, the intellectual, and Peter was the free spirit, or the sort of mad artist, if you will. And it was a very good balance.
I was very aware that this film essentially as a genre was a mystery story, which I read Alfred Hitchcock saying is probably one of the most difficult genres to tackle. And that is probably because the revelation of the solution is generally disappointing. The Butler did it.
If you see a thriller on television as a writer who's written lots of that sort of stuff, I sit there and I say, now, who's in this cast who really hasn't got any other role but to be the murderer, no matter how skillfully they're drawn? And what are the moments that have been put in that are actually quite erroneous and trivial, and they'll turn out to be the vital clues? So I sit there and annoy my wife by working it all out from those elements. There's nothing like that in Picnic because there isn't a solution.
There was a sense during the production that we were all working with Joan in mind, always at the back of our minds. Certainly Cliffy Green did.
I think we felt a strong sense of loyalty to Joan and a strong sense of gratitude that she'd written this lovely little book that we had such a strong feeling about as a film.
So we were, of course, very respectful of Joan, you know, and she was a not daunting or forbidding character, but she was very impressive. And we were impressed by her work, and that she'd given this, you know, she did approve of my directing it.
You couldn't have had an easier author to work towards. And she was warm and appreciative, and as I say, it was all a celebration all the way through.
Peter said to me, look, you know, you're terrific at finding things and creatively. And I said to him, yes, but I don't know the ropes. I really don't know the ropes. And so he suggested that Hal and Jim come in, and I was very happy.
No one had much experience then, but they did have it. They had gone down the road of financing a picture, and they had set up that first feature of mine, The Cars That Ate Paris.
We wanted to make a feature film, and so we asked Peter to write a script called Johnny and the Vampires, which was a vampire film starring John Farnham.
We tried to get finance for it, but no one seemed interested at the time.
And Peter said, well, what about this script? And he gave us Cars That Ate Paris, and Jim and I looked at each other and said, well, why not?
Welcome to Paris. No one leaves Paris. No one.
Picnic had been developed to 2 or 3 drafts by the time we were asked to become involved by Peter.
Peter said, you know, this is have you read the book? And we hadn't, then we read it and went, oh, wow, that's a great book. And he said, well, you know, I'm working with Pat Lovell and Cliff Green on a screenplay. Do you want to read the screenplay? And we said, yes. And so we read the screenplay, and he said, look, we're having trouble getting the money together. Can you do that? And we said, yes.
There were some issues about the sensuality in the film. Hal and I were advocates of that.
We knew we had a movie without an ending, and we were sensitive to the fact that Cars That Ate Paris really didn't have an ending either. And so we thought, well, here we go again. And so one of the decisions we made was, well, look, if these girls are going to disappear and we're never going to explain, it would be really great if they were really beautiful and looked fantastic. And so when they disappeared, you go, damn, I miss them. So it was about, in a sense, as simple as that. You know, let's have them be as fabulous as they can.
Here was a mystery that was not going to have a solution. So in a sense, it was an extremely dangerous commercial enterprise, despite its low budget in those days, because the audience would be waiting, whether disappointed or not, to find out who did it. Where are they? What happened to those girls?
You know, at the time in Australia, and it was, you know, the rebirth of the industry, everything was new. The only thing that was working were contemporary ochre comedies.
When you'd had such hits as Basil Mackenzie and Albert Purple, it's very difficult to convince people that, you know, no, this is something that will go.
But I think at the time there was, amongst a certain group on the edge of things, you know, some academics and journalists, a desire for us to have a classic, a desire for us to produce a Bergman or something. And they were constantly disappointed, you know, because whether it was with Picnic or anything else, you know, it wasn't, in most people's view, you were not the one.
The nature of film is, if it's any good, it's unique and it's completely different from everything that's gone before. But the only rules you got are based on what's gone before, which is why Americans say, oh, no. Well, no, of course, no one's going to be interested in this film because it's not like anything else before, because that's why they might be. And so its uniqueness was it was completely different. That was its strength, and that was, of course, its weakness, because everybody had to go, what? Oh, and readjust their thinking.
There were a number of voices out there that were saying, well, period films are never going to work. The irony, of course, is that as soon as we'd made Picnic, we then prepared the last wave, which was contemporary. And then everyone started saying, well, contemporary films don't work.
And there was an unfortunate pressure at one point from journalists and academics to not make period films after there'd been a string of them. And I thought that was so wrong, because they thought we should make more urban films and they should be more to do with today. Irrelevant, I think, was a word thrown around.
Picnic at Hanging Rock began the chocolate box revolution, which ended in pretty sort of sad circumstances in the Australian industry, and we were all told to get out and get contemporary and real and gritty and snotty and so on.
Filmmakers should feel free to pick out whatever coloured paint they want from the palette. So I didn't like that pressure at the time that people should not make period films. I thought it was absurd.
Peter and Jim went to London and interviewed Dominic Guard, and the original headmistress was to be Vivian Merchant.
I cast Vivian Merchant, who was then married to Harold Pinter, and I'd met her in London. I admired her work anyway, and a number of Pinter filmed plays, and a number of other films. She's a superb actress, and she seemed just right, and she was happy to do it. Unfortunately, at the very last minute, and I mean, she was in Hong Kong, in a play there, on her way to join us, and we were filming at Martindale Hall in South Australia, and she was due within, let's say 10 days, and she became ill and withdrew.
We got a phone call in Adelaide saying, sorry, your leading lady ain't coming. Now, that's about as close to a big problem, as big a problem as a producer's ever going to face. So we had to, overnight, find a replacement.
There was Rachel Roberts, whom I knew from the screen and had admired. She'd been on a short list, I think, anyway. And I looked at her latest picture, which was Murder on the Orient Express, and I thought, oh, she'd be great. Amazingly, she was free, and she joined us, within 2 weeks.
She had a huge career in theatre. And also, of course, she was very much part of the British New Wave cinema with Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, and I admired her work very much.
We had a beautiful wig made for Vivian Merchant, which fortunately fitted her. So I went to the makeup trailer, and Jose, who was doing the hair, was a very genteel man and very good at his job, and he was beautifully fitting it, but she looked very uncomfortable. She said, I can't wear this, I just simply can't. And I said, why? And I thought, oh my God, 1, she's going to be trouble, 2, she's not going to wear the wig. And I said, well why is that, Rachel? And she said, it's considered bad luck in the theatre to wear another actress's wig. And I said, oh, I see. And you don't think you could overcome that, being a film, and here we are in South Australia, maybe the gods only existed with that punishment in English theatre. She said, I just couldn't wear it, I'm sorry.
Rachel arrived with her own wig.
I ended up with an enormous dilemma, having to say, Rachel, we've got to get rid of this wig and get something else.
She just insisted that this was what suited her, and everybody was appalled. But I think she ended up getting her own way, as far as I recall, and I'm sure she got her own way in almost everything. Always.
I thought a little bit about not having that wig brought to Australia, but she had other thoughts, and of course we ended up with that wig.
And then we went out to film the first scene, and she had to look at the girls.
Well, young ladies, we are indeed fortunate in the weather for our picnic to Hanging Rock.
And she's farewelling them and say, although you're going on your picnic to Hanging Rock,
you may remove your gloves once the drag has passed through Wood End.
There will be no tomboy foolery on the rock, that kind of dialogue. And so we rehearsed. The girls were standing there looking up at her, and they disliked her. And she came to me, and I thought, oh no, more trouble. This is going to be hell. And she said, would you mind if the girls left the set? I'm perfectly happy if you put a mark up on a C-stand, a bit of tape, because the way they're looking at me with such hatred is throwing me. And I said, right, okay. So the girls were removed, a little bit of tape, and this consummate actress performed perfectly to the tape.
Cinematographers have to work very closely with the actors because we are actually in the front line. I seem to remember Rachel as being fairly aloof towards us. I doubt whether she knew any of our names even by the end of the film.
Rachel, as Mrs. Appleyard, really was the headmistress 24 hours a day.
She just sort of stepped automatically into those shoes, and that was the way it was going to be. And keep your knees together, young lady, and chins up, and that was on and off the set.
Sit up straight, child. Hold your shoulders back. You're getting a dreadful stoop.
She made very sure that she didn't build any relationship with the girls, any offset relationship, which I interpreted as being she wanted to stay in character, that she was not these girls' friend. She was their stern, prim, rather sadistic headmistress.
I expect you to be word perfect when I send Miss Lumley in half an hour. Otherwise, I'm afraid I shall have to send you to bed, instead of letting you stay up until the others return from the picnic.
Rachel was a dragon, really, a scary person. I didn't have a great deal to do with her, and she saw to that. On the few occasions that the schoolgirls were invited to any grown-up event, there was a definite segregation, but if we were invited to dinner, she would make sure that we were all sort of put down the end of the table so that nothing distracted the various men from her in the course of the evening. And she liked to drink.
A little more, mademoiselle.
No, madame. And she got scarier and scarier the more she did.
She did do a few outrageous things. I mean, I think one of the funniest, and which had everybody terribly scared, was we were in this motel in Adelaide.
There was a great flurry around her room, and then the door burst open.
And somebody came in and said, "Rachel's in the courtyard, stark naked and making such a noise. Will you come and help?" And everybody else had flown for cover.
Because she was from the balcony just screaming the world.
With a sort of siren call for any sort of willing participants in a night of fun.
Here I am, you can take me. And
I could just imagine all the blokes trembling in their boots at the thought of that. A night with Rachel.
Is that rouge I see on your cheek, mademoiselle?
Powder, madame. I find it becoming.
She was what you would expect. I expected, and she certainly lived up to my expectations, of a consummate actress, absolutely professional and dedicated and totally committed to what she was doing.
Watching her work, oh, gee, she was good. She was spot on. And she, like a conductor of the orchestra as the director, I could ask her to slightly vary a performance one way or another, and she would do so.
Lost, raped, murdered in cold blood like a silly schoolgirl on that wretched hanging rock.
What was particularly interesting to witness as an actor was that she really understood and was able to find that inner struggle in that character.
And to have pulled off that performance, having come that far to, as far as she was concerned, the jungle, was a remarkable feat and, considerable bravery on her part.
I loved her a great deal, and I'm sad that she had such a rotten life, or I think some of it she brought on herself.
Casting the girls presented a curious kind of challenge in the sense that when we began, naturally in Sydney, which is where the production was located initially, and then going down to Melbourne, the girls were too sophisticated, too worldly, even in 1975. I wanted to really feel that these girls truly were from 1900 and that they weren't knowing. They still had an innocence. It was in Adelaide that we found in casting there that was still the case there, that whether it was to do with their particular family life or the fact that, I remember a lot of them were involved in crafts and learning music. They seemed to be at that particular era in Adelaide more as if they had come from an earlier period.
I had the feeling that Peter thought that perhaps we were too young and inexperienced to really be handled as actors, and that he was looking for qualities in us that we weren't perhaps even aware we possessed.
the person cast brings their persona and melds it with the character and the attributes of the character in the script or book. And so to some extent you do therefore borrow a little of their personality, and therefore in casting you're also looking for what qualities they have as a human being.
And I think there was probably an element of mistrust in that he didn't feel that perhaps we were old enough or experienced enough to play the part. We really just needed to be those people.
He was always looking to add some extra dimension, to find something else in them, physically, in their look, in their attitude, in their physicality, the way they moved, the way they sat, the way they talked, the way they looked, to add another dimension, to give them depth.
Describe it. The first one was tall and dark. Then there was the little dumpy one. Then a girl with glasses. And the last one was slim and fair.
We're really quite a plain bunch, comparatively speaking. If you imagine the same film being made now, how, you know, what a bunch of spunks there'd be.
Anne Lambert, I think, when she was 15, featured in a very strongly. She was the lead character in a commercial for a new product. In those days, it was a new product called Fanta, and she was known as Fancy Nancy in those commercials.
Fancy Nancy, Fancy's orange Fanta.
So I sort of knew Anne vaguely when we went into the picture, but she was absolutely a gorgeous, gorgeous girl.
Then I started doing some television, a very bad soap called Class of 74.
Class of 74.
What's that? I've got to get out of here.
Nobody move.
And I think it was Martin Sharp who perhaps recommended me to Peter, and I think it was my performance in number 96 that stuck in Martin's mind. So I saw Peter and auditioned, screen tested, and was cast, and the sort of it had all been agreed, and then a little later I got a call saying that they'd actually decided they'd made a mistake.
I liked her very much, but I didn't think she had this quality that I'd looked for in the girls in Adelaide. She seemed a little, not older, but a little more worldly. And initially that seemed to be a wrong direction to go.
And that they were going to cast Ingrid Mason instead.
We had rehearsals for about 2 weeks before the filming commenced. I remember Peter came to Hal and I and said, look, this is not really working.
Peter came in one day and said, look, it's got to be Anne. It's got to be Anne. You know, oh my God, what can we do? But it was one of those, got to bite the bullet and do it.
I got a call from Peter saying that he was very sorry and that he'd made a mistake, and would I consider accepting the part back.
I called her back and tested again, as I recall, and began to realise that this quality she had was exactly apropos of the part. That, in other words, Miranda was not like the other girls, and she knew things.
Miranda knows lots of things other people don't know. Secrets.
Peter's instincts were absolutely spot on. And so whilst it was very disappointing for Ingrid, clearly the film benefited hugely by that change.
I had to do a huge band-aid on the original girl, and did talk her into coming into the film as one of the senior girls.
Somebody had the nerve to send Miss McCraw a card on squared paper covered with tiny sums.
Which I thought was a marvellous thing for her to do.
Anne Lambert had, I would think, the most difficult role in the film. She was playing Miranda, who as a person almost doesn't exist. She's an ethereal character floating through this story, yet she's the lead.
Anne was just that presence all the time. I mean, she became Miranda, and she was Miranda for all of us. I mean, it was very easy to say she's like a Botticelli angel, because she was.
I never got the last one, the blonde. Oh, she'd have a decent pair of legs. All the way up to her bum.
I'd rather you didn't say crude things like that, Albert.
I say the crude things. You just think them.
Somehow she just managed to light that light inside her and project it down the camera.
Black horse, white horse, brown horse, grey, trotting down the paddock on a bright sunny day.
She did carry a kind of aura with her. I think that it was a question of the role suiting the person and the person inhabiting the role.
Peter thinking that, he'd cast someone who was, in fact, the character, perhaps, was a little misguided, because I was so different to her. She seemed like such a, natural and loving, warm, kind of sunny, uncomplicated person. And I was so shy and hypersensitive. We were quite different.
To St. Valentine. To St. Valentine.
When I think back to that time, it really was a bit like school, and I hated school. And for the same reasons. People formed little cliques and groups and intense friendships very quickly. And I seemed to be sort of on the outer. They'd all sit in their little groups and chat and gossip and talk about which bloke they liked or whatever, and you'd sort of be there like a bit of a ring-in.
Recently we were having a coffee and she said, Pat, I longed to get into that circle of girls and to come and speak to you. And it was very sad.
It was a fairly lonely time. And also I wasn't allowed to be with the grown-ups, so it was sort of like I was, a bit stuck.
We've made up now, the two of us have made up, but there was nothing, it was just that she was distant as well.
I think we all did, to a great extent, become the roles we were playing, and Margaret particularly.
Peter said, I'm worried about Margaret because Sarah committed suicide in the movie. And I'm worried that Margaret has embraced the role so convincingly and so absolutely and immersed herself in it that she may do the unthinkable, to take the step herself. And so that was the sort of volatility of the emotions involved.
She had, in a way, the most difficult role she was playing, that tortured soul, Sarah.
People don't sit on cold steps in the dark unless they're weak in the head.
I thought she did such an interesting character. She made so much out of very little. She didn't go on the picnic, she was there. She had really one theme, which was that she was, in the way a young girl can be, had a crush on Miranda.
You must learn to love someone else, apart from me, Sarah.
I was always bothered by the idea it was like lesbians or something. So boring. It wasn't that.
Blanche said Sarah writes poetry. In the dunny! She found one there on the floor, all about Miranda.
She's an orphan.
Kids at school, in that sort of pubescent period and early adolescence do have crushes on the same sex.
There you are, Miranda, dear. Mr. Whitehead gave them to me, to give to you. My dear. My sweet Miranda.
She was quite a solitary person on set as well as in the film, and was very focused on her work, serious and intense. She had a lot of difficult scenes to play.
I was in an orphanage once.
Were you, Sarah?
Emotional scenes.
I told the matron I wanted to be a lady circus rider on a white horse in a spangled dress. She was afraid I'd run away, so she shaved my head. I bit her arm. It bled. So she painted my head with gentian violet.
Her work in Picnic at Hanging Rock is very fine work. I think Sarah is just works as a character, and moves people. She's obviously decided to not be an actor anymore and has left all of this behind.
Oh, Miranda.
Many people have looked for her. In a sense, she's missing, but fortunately, only from the acting world.
Karen Robson was just glorious at that age. She was one of the younger girls, and yet you'd never have known it. She was one of the most worldly young girls I've ever known.
If only we could stay out all night and watch the moon rise.
Karen embodied all of that intelligence and humour and quite high status that Irma has in the story.
Sarah reminds me of a little deer Papa brought home once. I looked after it, but it died.
She always struck me as impossibly elegant, because
There's good old fat dumpy me. There's Karen, who just, is just willowy and beautiful. Lovely, lovely lady.
Everything about her was just sort of slightly eccentric and yet gorgeous. And you just couldn't take your eyes off her. And she knew it.
The boy stood on the burning deck, whence all but he had fled, tra-la. I forget the rest.
She was remarkably intelligent, Karen.
She was very into the filmmaking process, very interested in it, and aware of who was doing what was going on.
Karen Robson, Irma, did leave the country, as in the story. Went off in a cloak to the United States, and there she married a film director who's a very promising up-and-coming filmmaker, and she herself, a lawyer, is now also a producer, and it's a name that you may see, but on the other side of the camera.
She was something. She was really something.
I went along, I did the audition, they took some photos of me. They must have sort of thought, oh, maybe she's a possibility. And they told my mother, because I was 13 at the time, well, she'd better go and read the book. Do you have a copy? No. Oh, okay. So my mother went and bought a copy. She went to the kids section of the bookstore because that's where she felt the book would be. And the lady looked at her and said, no, madam, I think you'll find that in the adult section of the bookstore. So I don't know what my parents thought I was getting into.
Miranda, don't go up there, come back!
My favourite scene with her was her counting her Valentine's Day cards. And I don't think I said much to her on that day. She just knew the scene.
I think she sent all those Valentine cards to herself because nobody was going to send her any, and so she had to have the most.
With an untrained actor, you really have to pretty rapidly drop a scene that is not natural to them because they don't have the technique to fake it. And so the scenes that she was in were substantially those that she deeply understood, and she did understand a girl who was proud of the fact she had, was so popular, at least as she saw it at that moment.
Edith is always pictured as being very much on the outer of everybody.
May I come too, please?
So long as you don't complain.
I won't, I promise.
And I think at that stage of my life anyway, as a teenage girl growing up in a suburban high school and being interested in the stuff that I was interested in and not interested in, say, netball or football or that sort of thing, I was very much on the outer.
I do wish you'd stop talking for once.
Poor Edith. We'll go back soon.
She got right into the role, she'd pester you with questions and make pronouncements on what people were doing, offer criticism where it wasn't particularly wanted.
It's nasty here. I never thought it would be so nasty, or I wouldn't have come.
She was great, very funny, very funny.
Christine, I haven't seen since I think the opening night in Adelaide, when she had lost a lot of weight. I couldn't believe it. This girl in a slinky dress walked up and it was Christine. No, she was good fun. She was good fun. This is very sad. I hope I can actually speak about it. Janie was an angel. I think she gave Marion that quality of sturdiness and being very erudite with those glasses.
Whatever can those people be doing down there? Like a lot of ants. A surprising number of human beings are without purpose.
She was actually a little like Marion, kind of salt of the earth, straight up. What you see is what you get.
You'd often find her doing what she did in the film. She liked to press flowers and things like that. She was interested in nature.
From my perspective, I'm dead scared of Anne Lambert because she's out there in the world making film, and Karen is quite sophisticated, perhaps a bit worldly wise. And there's Jane, and she was just gorgeous. Out of the three, if I had to say who did I really feel comfortable with, was Jane.
Jane passed away, unfortunately, not so long ago, and it's hard to talk about that. I didn't know her well, but many of the other girls kept in touch.
Who do I miss most when I think about people is Jane, because she was really a beautiful person and she was very kind, and it's just so sad that she died so young. And I think we all miss her. because this film has connected us all. And it's like losing a good friend. Even though you haven't seen them for years and years, you still miss them.
She did a wonderful job in the film, and as I'm talking to you, I can see her now on the top of that rock looking down through her glasses.
I had worked with Cliff Green and Peter Weir before. I'd worked with Cliff on a series called Marion that he wrote for the ABC. And I'd worked with Peter in a series called League's Kingdom. I had a sort of an ongoing running part of this rather damaged convict girl.
What is it?
So I guess all of those things probably helped to a degree.
Helen, like Rachel, another superb actor, totally in command of her craft.
What did you say? They found Irma and she's still alive. Oh. No one else? No.
She's really sensational and a pleasure to work with. You know, utterly professional, always prepared, always calm, always ready.
She brought to that film, I think, something that we'll always thank her for, because she was so magnificent. She was never a trouble. She never demanded anything. And as Rachel was full of demands, it was wonderful to have Helen there amongst us.
Helen Morse at the time would have to have been one of the most beautiful human beings you'd ever lay eyes on. She was absolutely shiny and had a true delicacy of spirit about her. There was something kind of tremulously kind of sensitive and responsive in her. You couldn't help but fall in love with her. She was just one of those people at a particular time in her life, and she was irresistible.
In Joan Lindsay's book, Mamselle is described as being only 1 or 2 years older than the girls, it appears. Well, I was a few years older than they were. But I mean, I loved playing Mamselle. She was, in her particularly French way, somewhat of a rebel in the institution.
And she was such a fantastic contrast to Mrs. Appleyard.
The headmistress was a kind of lonely, dried-out, sexless, androgynous sort of creature in Rachel's hands. Not that Rachel was, but she made her that, which of course was a perfect contrast to this sort of ripe sensuality of Helen.
She doesn't repress the girls in their romantic ideas and their love of music and dancing, and in their capacity to explore themselves and their own relationship to the world.
I should like to make a few measurements at the base of the rock if we have time, with Miranda and Irma.
Eh bien, allez.
She was a real woman, and these young girls were budding women, and so she was a kind of perfect role model of what those young schoolgirls would wish to become.
I just thought she was the best actor in the country, and I'm pretty close to still feeling like that, particularly that performance she gave.
Coming back from the rock after the disappearance, we had some difficult emotional scenes to play.
Madame, something terrible has happened.
What do you mean? And where in heaven's name is Miss McCraw?
We left her behind at the rock.
You left her behind?
The scene when I go to visit Irma when she's rescued or found was quite an intense scene to play.
We thought you had gone forever. Let me look at you, chérie. You are so pale, but prettier than ever.
It was great to have to do that kind of work.
She's had a magical screen presence. And of course, it was immediately recognised around the world. People went, oh my God, that woman in pink, oh, she's fabulous. Because they knew Rachel, they didn't know Helen.
She could have been a huge star, the amount of work she turned back. And I mean, a great, huge star. I think she's a wonderful actress.
Probably everyone on the entire film, male and female, had a crush on Helen. You couldn't not have.
Now I know. What do you know? I know that Miranda is a Botticelli angel.
to have that talent and to be so good looking, you know, not many of us around. The similarities with Albert that I have is I was brought up in the bush and I'm a country boy. I was only, 4 years out of central Queensland.
Jeez, haven't thought of that bloody dump in donkey's years.
And so at the time I was probably the best person for the part.
I really enjoyed him because he was such an Aussie ocker. And he was the only one in that film that had that non-English sort of being about him.
How's it going? All right.
John, I think, brings a wonderful sensitivity to what could have been in lesser hands. An ocker with, not much going for him, but he finds dimension.
We'll have to be gone soon. Dark before we get back.
I'm staying here.
You're what?
I'm staying here.
Here? On the rock?
Yes.
What the hell for? You're mad.
Yes, perhaps I am. But I'm still staying because somebody has to. Just because you lot are Australians.
You're a funny bugger.
It's hard to play that character because it was already a cliche then, the kind of outback, laconic character. And yet he had an innocence about him, John, in the way he portrayed it.
Mr. Michael's pretty knocked up, sir. He's sleeping there. The pub.
Just if I know how his aunt will take it. All right, carry on, Crandall.
Thank you, sir.
One of the things when I see Picnic Hang Rock now is, I see this young boy, obvious I'm not young anymore, and quite good looking. I didn't think I was good looking. You know, when you are that young, you think, I'm an ugly looking bugger. But quite a good looking kid, I thought, I wasn't that bad. But the other funny thing is my voice was so much higher. I couldn't believe it. It was like sitting there with Dominic doing that scene, drinking the beer and sharing the beer, and this little voice saying,
The way I look at it is this.
if the bloody bloodhounds and the bloody abos can't bloody find them, no bloody well can, sort of like that.
People have been pushed before today. And as far as I'm concerned, well, that's the stone end of it.
That amuses me, seeing it, 30 years down the track.
The performance of Albert in Picnic is my favourite performance of John's in all his career. Some of those moments just are so gently humorous.
The old man hired me to look after the horses. I'm buggered if I'm going to be a lackey at a bloody garden party. And that's what I bloody well told him. All the rest.
And say so much about the Australian male character.
The Sheilas are all alike when it comes to the fellas. Doesn't matter if it's a bloody college you come from or the Ballarat orphanage where me and my kid sister was dragged up.
And the society at the time.
Drink?
The moment when he hands Michael the bottle and Michael is about to wipe the top of it and he realises that would be offensive, and the character played by John Jarratt knows it's offensive. And there's more in that moment that tells you about that theme of the clash of cultures than perhaps anything else in the film.
With Dominic being so British and so, terribly British really, I think John was a fabulous contrast. And the two of them, of course, got on like a house on fire. So they did become mates, which was great.
When I first saw him, I thought he was a bit of a little scrawny pommy, and I was a bit pissed off that he got the part over in Australia, and I thought we could have pulled off the pommy accent. I freaked him out a little because my arms were covered in tattoos and he thought I was a bit mean. Probably was a bit mean towards him at that stage, but we became the best of mates, and he's a terrific bloke and he's not up himself at all.
I was kept from knowing him during the filming because one of the other girls had a crush on him and her friends conspired to make sure that I never got anywhere near him.
He's the loveliest guy, Dominic. He was just a great guy. But he had that slightly hesitant, almost stuttering upper-class English accent. Light. And he talked like that.
A few minutes ago you said there was only 3 of them.
Oh yeah. That's because the dumpy one was back a little. And then they moved off into the trees. And that's the last we saw of them.
Dominic's got a lovely, gentle quality. It's quite rare in someone of that age.
He was older than his years, an old soul, you might say, in a young body. And that was perfect for the film, and he brought that to the film, that quality.
He was always talking to Peter about the character and the background and wanted to kind of get it right.
This was a film in which volumes had to be said without words. And you had to sense things through the way a person, for what they didn't say.
As the girls were jumping the creek, what were you thinking of?
So he gave us all of that yearning and that guilt and that pain, really often without dialogue. And his performance, I thought, was flawless in that way.
Jackie was a big star then. I'd worked with her on Alvin Purple.
She was in just about every Aussie movie made around that time, actually.
She was incredibly sexy and vivacious and outgoing and gregarious and had this sort of mad social life and all these mad, fabulous romances, and she was a legend.
She brought a bit of joy into it and a lot of life into it.
We wanted a kind of sexy, exuberant chambermaid, and of course there's no one better in Australia to play that role.
That's Mrs. Appleyard. Let someone else go.
Jackie Weaver's character of the maid could be seen to be one of those comic-like relief characters. I saw her as a commentator upon the sad dilemma these children were in.
I feel sorry for them kids.
The ones on the rock, you mean?
Yeah, them too. I was thinking of them other poor little devils. Here, at the college.
She's got a great deal of heart, and it shows in that scene with Tony Llewellyn-Jones in bed.
They're all right. Rolling in cash, most of them. Or at least their mothers and fathers are.
Some of them are orphans. Or wards, or...
Jackie Weaver and Tony Llewellyn-Jones were both, then as now, well-known, highly regarded performers. A delightful combination. That was a case where, when having cast them separately, when they were brought together, I was delighted because you could believe a great deal, and therefore they brought a backstory with them, just the way they were around each other. You sensed, you believed that, and I was thrilled with what they did, both of them.
I'd never consciously noticed it before. I'd probably driven through that country, but I hadn't noticed it.
There she is, ladies. Hanging rock.
And I can remember the sight of it standing up there with the mist coming down over the top, being remarkably dramatic.
Peter kept saying we could maybe make it in the Blue Mountains, and we were chatting all the way, and then suddenly we came over a rise, and there down below us was this rock. I mean, I'm going strange now, but we both just looked at it and thought, oh, yes.
More than 500 feet high she is. Volcanic, of course. Thousands of years old.
1,000,000 years old, Mr. Hussey, or thereabouts.
Waiting 1,000,000 years. Just for us.
It's just not like anywhere else you've ever been. It's truly unique and truly beautiful.
Look. Not down at the ground, Edith. Way up there in the sky.
First impression was, oh, it's kind of lumpier and smaller and less majestic and inspiring than I expected. But then when you get to it and go and walk amongst it, it really is a scary place.
It's just full of all these caverns and corridors, and you can weave your way through the place. I think if you've been there, you could believe anything could happen there and that people could disappear there.
I really love the place. I love being there. I don't find it, upsetting or scary or any of that.
I used to go there when I was a kid. We'd go for picnics and climb all over the rock, but it was only when going back to make picnic at Hanging Rock that I actually became aware of those faces in the rock. And what is fascinating is that they are Aboriginal faces.
I don't know whether there are any local Indigenous people still remaining in that area, but it wouldn't surprise me that there is perhaps something in the past of that place that made it a significant place for the local people.
It had, you know, without stretching it or without any effort, a mystical quality to it.
Hanging Rock is quite an ominous location.
There's something spooky about it.
It was a very eerie place to be.
Why can't we just sit on this log and look at the ugly old rock from here?
Of course, we were pre-sold. You know, we were making a story about the mystery and trying to create an aura.
There was a lot of, you know, zhuzhing up the atmosphere going on. So one was never quite sure how much of it was just that.
Strange things did happen around the rock.
Blowed up my watch hasn't stopped. Did on 12 o'clock.
Stopped at 12. Never stopped before.
Equipment went missing and watches stopped and all of that stuff actually happened.
We were trying to film on the top of the rock, right? And this big storm came. Massive storm. And the wind blew and thunder, lightning, and everyone battened down and we said, we'll just have to sit this one out. And the storm went right around the rock. We're standing on the rock and you could see the rain pouring down. You could actually see it, but not where we were, you know? And that was a bit freaky, you know? That the storm went right around this rock but didn't actually rain on where we were. And we stood there in the middle watching it, you know? Do-do-do-do.
I think everybody that's been there leaves feeling that there's something a little bit special and mysterious about that place. I think even today, 30 years later, people could go there and still go, whoa, this is kind of an amazing place.
Because of the financing arrangement, we did have to shoot in Victoria and in South Australia, and that was okay because here was this extraordinary building.
We had to walk to a fence and then peer around a bush to see it. It was like, oh my God, that's it. It's fantastic.
It's just there, plonked